Good afternoon. Welcome to The Law. This is your legal light and health law. COVID-19 cases are ravaging workplaces like never before. According to the Director General of the Ghana Health Service, Patrick Kumar-Boaje, the cases have moved from the communities and affecting more workers. As you know, Parliament has had to suspend for 3 weeks after some MPs got affected and over 100 or so of staff also got affected. They defied orders to isolate, causing the cases in Parliament to surge. 17 MPs and over 150 staff have tested positive. This led to the drastic decision by the Speaker to suspend sitting until later. There's more in our news round.
Some members of Parliament who have in fact tested positive to the COVID are still coming to the chamber. Let all members who have been informed of their test results that they have tested positive withdraw from the precincts of Parliament, not just the chamber. Stay home and self-isolate, go through the protocols and recover.
Beginning next week, members would not be allowed to bring their visitors to the House, including their officers. The same directive goes to the staff.
I have, in consultation with leadership, decided that the sitting of the House be suspended for 3 weeks. The House will take a break as from tomorrow, Wednesday, 10 February 2021, to Tuesday, 2nd March 2021.
So as you may know by now, not only in the workplace, but ordinarily people are getting infected and they cannot bother to take caution and self-isolate, even when doctors have told them to self-isolate. Ghana's COVID-19 active case count is now at 8,216. That's the active case count. We now have a death toll of 533. And the situation is getting dire, as we understand, in the last few weeks, particularly with a new variant in town. There have been complaints about people who have been infected and yet are afraid to ask for time off from work for fear that they might lose their jobs. Because in the wake of COVID, some have already lost their jobs in the thousands. There are also complaints about employers who have decided not to really bother and have asked asymptomatic COVID-19 patients to come to work anyway. Are there any implications legally, and what can be done? There's a harrowing story of a pregnant woman who got infected at the workplace and had to be forced delivered just because of one worker's carelessness. So, join us, and I'm privileged to welcome Susanna Sabia Nyampong. She is associate at T. Forcing & Co. Joining us via Zoom is Iris K. Agri-Orleans, Managing Associate at Bayo & Co. Ladies, thank you so very much for making time to spend your afternoon with us.
Thank you, Samson. Thank you.
Great. So let's begin with you, Susanna. First of all, how do you feel hearing about particularly even members of parliament who are supposed to show good example, tested positive and refusing to self-isolate, coming to work and obviously infecting other people?
Well, Samson, it's I think the only word I should use is it's sad and very unfortunate. I have a colleague who has died as a result of one of these incidents. She's working as a consultant for an institution. Somebody tested positive. Nobody bothered to inform her that some members of staff had tested positive. She gets infected, and unfortunately, a week later, she dies. And all because somebody would not self-isolate. Now, I know a lot of people think COVID is a joke, but for the care of another human being, we must take it seriously.
Aris, before the parliamentarians put up the conduct that we are told about, and the speaker had to be forced to shut the place down, to force them to stay off, we actually had one of them who was a minister actually going out in a campaign when, you know, he had tested positive. In fact, he had to lose his job as a minister as a result of that. How much do you think that may influence other people who are presently refusing to self-isolate? Okay, I understand we have a little challenge. Great. So, Aris, my question to you to start with is, do you think that the MP's conduct, which forced the speaker to shut parliament, to force them not to come to, work, so to speak, could have been influenced partly by their colleague who was a minister, lost his job as a minister, who also tested positive, was supposed to be in isolation, and went out to campaign? How much of that may also influence ordinary citizens to want to go out even when they have tested positive and are being asked to isolate and treat?
Well, definitely the conduct of the MPs is very worrying, and especially since they are leaders and they are the legislature. They are the ones who are passing these laws and expecting us, the ordinary Ghanaians, to obey. It's very worrying if you pass these laws and you yourself are not obeying. As to the security of their jobs, they should never worry about it, because they know the law. They passed it and they know the repercussions. So yes, their behavior is worrying, and it may definitely be what is setting the tone for the ordinary Ghanaians not adhering to protocols to isolate, especially when you have tested positive.
Right. Let's start from this point. The states or the president passed an EI by which isolation and quarantine for people who have tested positive was mandatory. So in a situation where the state doesn't have enough facilities to isolate and quarantine you to treat, can you blame anybody, particularly people who are asymptomatic, who have tested positive and feel it's okay to go to work?
Certainly. You see, we are in, as we've all been saying, we are not in normal times. We are in a pandemic. We never, or the government never thought that the numbers will be so large that it will be virtually impossible to as it were, to quarantine people or to isolate people in government designated places. As at today, from the numbers shown, it looks like we have about 7,000 active cases.
We have, as of today, we have 8,216.
So I stand to be corrected. So
yes.
8,000 active cases. Are you saying that the government should provide 8,000 beds and 8,000 places of isolation for 8,000 people? And these are the people who have actually tested positive and who actually know their status, not to mention all the other people who don't know their status. So I think that it's indeed, it's not something that could have been envisaged by anybody. However, the EI, looking at the spirit of the Public Health Act and the EI that was passed pursuant to all of these, you can clearly see that there is an attempt to tell the citizens that stay away. Even if you cannot isolate in a government designated place, as Section 5 of the EI 65 says, you should be able to isolate at home. Stay away from people who you are likely to infect.
All right. So, Susanna, what do you say? Some people will say self-isolating may be a luxury for just a few Ghanaians, if you like.
Well, yes. Yes, it is a luxury. In fact, not for a few Ghanaians. For most Ghanaians, it will be a luxury.
Okay, that's right.
But the truth of the matter is, which is better? To find somewhere, a little corner in your house where you can mask up, hide, or to come out and infect everybody and kill your loved ones. I think that there's a need for people to understand the risk and weigh them. That's how I feel. Yes, it's difficult to self-isolate. Where are you going to self-isolate? You don't even know. You're living in a little single room with your wife and 5 kids, and sometimes your mother-in-law and who God knows who else is in that house. But it will be necessary to find when everybody goes, when you get home, maybe you're used to sleeping on the same bed with your wife and your kids. Maybe now you leave them and you go and sleep in some small corner by the door. It helps that you're not breathing in the same air, but you need to self-isolate. It's necessary.
So the best way that the state could have controlled the situation was, as it passed through a law, that once you test positive, I will be responsible. I'll take you and I will imprison you, so to speak. Mandatory quarantine and treat.
Yes.
Now, it can't afford that.
It's not even possible.
So why blame, someone who is infected, who feels he's asymptomatic, is okay, because there are people who are infected and they are all right.
Yeah, well, Samson, it's the same way the government mandated us to wear masks in public and imposed a heavy fine of 1,000 penalty units and prison term of 4 to 10 years for not wearing a mask. Now, what's more dangerous? If I don't wear a mask and I am caught, I am liable to go and be imprisoned for a minimum of 4 years. I mean, if you're positive and you're roaming, then I am afraid the penalty for that should be much higher. But these are the times we are in. You can't say I'm asymptomatic, so I'm okay, but you're spreading the disease. And if the same penalty attached to not wearing a mask were to be attached to persons who test positive and refuse to isolate, I'm sure that the story would have changed by now.
Interesting. So, under the present circumstance, what does the law say first about employers? Because that is also an aspect that is really sad, about employers who say, we can't afford to let you go home. After all, you are okay, you can work. So whether you tested positive or not, the rest of the people here at the workplace don't know, so come to work. Are there any consequences?
I believe there should be consequences. I believe there should be consequences, and I believe the unions must step in at this point. Now, the workplace is supposed to be a safe place. Now, it's provided by the Constitution, it's provided by the Labour Act, it's provided by the Factories, Offices and Shops Act. I mean, it's provided by international treaties and regulations. The workplace is supposed to be safe. Now, once you have a COVID positive person in your workplace, it ceases to be a safe place. Simple as that.
So the Constitution says you have a right to work in a satisfactory,
safe, and under healthy conditions.
Okay.
Repeated in the Labour Act. Repeated in the Factories Act. And this Factories Act was far back as 1970. But even at that time, we realized that the workplace must be a safe place. Now, as soon as you bring a COVID positive person and say, well, you're asymptomatic, so continue working, you're making an environment which is unsafe. Because once I come in, I can get infected and I may not be asymptomatic. I might end up on a ventilator. I might end up dying, like my colleague died. She lasted just a week after testing positive. All because somebody thought, well, I'm asymptomatic. But even, I actually believe both the employers and the staff who do that must actually be prosecuted. Finding a way, I mean, in the Factories Act is there, where an inspector can deem a workplace unfit and even ask the court to close it down. I think we need to go back into the law and find out all these little things which will help aid, enforce, so to speak, the employers on doing the right thing.
So if you're an employer who is watching us now, however you are connecting with us, the first thing you ought to note right now is that if you cannot, and you have decided not to allow your human heart, the kindness in your heart to be expressed in this circumstance, then there's a threat of your workplace actually being closed down and you might be prosecuted. Now, Iris, the issue of a workplace being safe for every worker, I thought employers thought it's about the tools that are required. It's not about really bringing in an infection.
Well, health and safety goes way beyond tools required, because if you look in the Factories Act, Factories, Offices and Shops Act, you will see that there are different, when it comes to health and safety, there are different sections. There include meal times, it includes overcrowding, ventilation, even the cleaning of the floors, ensuring that there is adequate drainage. So it is not exactly only providing the tools, but providing an overall healthy and safe environment. And these are the considerations that the WHO and the ILO, the International Labour Organization, the Organization for All Labor worldwide, and because of which we've actually passed our Labor Act. These are the considerations they came to make or to discuss or to define what occupational health and safety was. So it is not merely the absence of illness, but an environment that promotes the health and safety of all workers. So yes, the Factories Act provide for certain levels of safety for workers.
If you were to advise employers who are listening to us right now directly, what would you tell them, again, about the fact that there are some employees who are afraid to make a disclosure because they feel they stand the risk of losing their jobs, and some employers actually feel they can't let you, if they are letting everybody is getting infected and they are letting them go, and this is not leave, so to speak, how is there going to be money to take care of the business?
You see, the Labour Act takes care of or provides for sick leave. If you are sick, the Labor Act says that you should not commute it as part of the annual leave. You should allow the person to get better, because if the person is ill, what will happen is that the person will infect all the other workers, and you do not know how another worker's body will take the infection. If you are thinking about the bottom line being money, the point still remains that if all your workers are sick and they die, your business will still suffer. So it is better to operate at half capacity than to operate at full capacity with sick workers. It is stated clearly under the Labor Act that sick leave, employers are supposed to grant their employees sick leave if they are able to show a certificate by a medical officer. And once you test positive, you will be given, the positive test result, which you can show to an employer in order to start your sick leave. Apart from that, we can even stretch it and say that you are negligently causing harm, because you do not know how another person will be taken or another person's body would be reacting to this. So if by your actions I lose one lung, can I stretch it and say that I strongly believe so, that it is even covered under the Criminal Offences Act, under Section 72, where it says that you should not negligently cause harm. So these are some of the things. So if you are an employer and you are allowing your sick employees to come in, you are an accomplice to the causing harm.
Right. Now, Susie, so what Aris just spoke about, clearly, I'm sure that employers are taking note.
Yes.
But employer is asking himself or herself, you're entitled to annual leave. You may have taken your annual leave. You may have exhausted it. And here I am, because of COVID, I'm supposed to still let you go home and pay you under what you just said is sick leave. I can't afford that. That doesn't make sense to me. And then the employee may also have the feeling that I know how my employer may feel, and because of this, I just may go home and never come back.
Yes, Samson. It's unfortunate employers feel like that. And that's the reason why there are laws. Now, the law knew employers would feel like that, which is why when the Labor Act was being passed, there was something in there called sick leave. If it wasn't COVID and it was something else, would the employer say, no, still come to work? You'll be granted your sick leave because it's your right, it's your due. You are sick. You should be allowed to get better before coming back. In fact, in most places of employment, the employer is even paying for your medical expenses to ensure that you get better and come back and work. Imagine all the amount of resources you have invested into this employee, and because he's sick for a week or two, or has to isolate for 2 weeks, you're going to allow it all to go. I don't think employees should be thinking like that. They should be thinking of the long term of the business, in that there are repercussions both for the business on the money line and also on the legal line, where if you do not allow these employees to do what they're supposed to do by law, then you face repercussions.
There was this woman who was forced delivered because an employee got infected and it was not disclosed, and the employee kept going to work, and through that infected this pregnant woman. She's very unhappy at this moment. What can she do beyond that?
I believe for the first options, these are matters that should be reported to the Labor Department. They have to investigate how come somebody was positive, was allowed to come to work, and such. I also believe that if she feels strongly about it, she might be able to take her employers on, because this is a damage or an injury she suffered from an incident at the workplace. yes, I know the Workmen's Compensation Act didn't take some of these things into consideration, but the law is more about the spirit than the letter. I believe a court of law would look beyond the words in the Workmen's Compensation Act and actually find that she might be entitled to some form of compensation, because as a result of an infection she caught at the workplace.
She's lucky she hasn't died.
Oh, well, some do die.
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate part of it. At least she's lucky. Her child is alive, she's alive, but still she suffered some form of injury. And these things are things that I believe we should be advocating more for and pushing more for. To make employers realize that it's not a joke.
There are actually people who die after the post-COVID experience that may die after as a result. The president, when he was doing his last broadcast on COVID, advised employers to do round shifts.
Yes, shift system.
How does he get them to comply so that at least the workplace there's a bit of an assurance?
Yes. Well, I was hoping that an EI will be passed in respect of that. I'm currently not aware if anything of such has been passed, but I was hoping. You see, because for now it's advice. And in as much as most people would want to abide and listen to the advice of the president, it is difficult to force them to implement some of these things when there's nothing in the law. And we all know that by the imposition of restrictions, and the president is supposed to, by EI, put down these restrictions so that it is law. And so I'm really hoping that when the president speaks, the next step would be taken so that it becomes mandatory for everybody to follow what the president has advised.
Great. You are still here on the law. This is your Legal Light and Health Law. We are discussing the implications, common sense approach, and in the absence of applying wisdom, what the law will do to you if you have tested positive and you are refusing to self-isolate and get treatment and you are attending to work, or you are an employer who is not allowing your workers time off to isolate and to treat. Now, Aris, can we now look at those who generally, by themselves, take that decision, and it's not the employer's fault? They've gone to test, they didn't tell anybody, they know they are positive, they are simply refusing to disclose, and they are going to work.
Well, under the Public Health Act, there's a penalty for anyone who contravenes the provisions, especially on isolation. You may be on summary conviction liable to a fine of about 50 penalty units or a term of imprisonment of about 3 months. So yes,
50 penalty units. That's just like 600 cedis.
That's 600 cedis.
But that's
600
not,
cedis.
not wearing a mask. I'm paying a minimum of 12,000, and
that's
putting someone in a place where they could die. I'm going to pay 600, or go to jail for only 6 months. Is it 3 months? Yeah.
3 months.
Yeah. What is that? Not wearing a mask, I go to jail for 4 years or up to 10 years.
Well, and that is where Susan came in, and Susan said that she was hoping, or she's hoping, that an EI will be passed specifically for isolation, where if you refuse to isolate upon testing and proof of which shall be on you, that you actually are negative. And so if you refuse to isolate and you go about your duties as normal and you infect other people, you should be able to be fined more than the 1,000 penalty units for not wearing a mask, because you are actually putting people's lives at risk. And that is where I mentioned again, under the Criminal Offences Act, could we stretch and say that you have negligently caused harm to me by your action? Because your act, you should have known, or you ought to have known that by putting me at risk of contracting COVID, you have actually put my life at risk, or I have lost my life, I have lost an organ or whatever it is. We could stretch it, that part.
Yes, Susan, what do you have to say about that part?
Yes, I believe that necessarily.
Some of them, we must admit, as we have gotten to know, are entertaining a certain fear.
Yes.
Because when COVID came, workplaces laid off a lot of people.
Definitely.
So they may be lucky that they are still at work. And going to say I'm not, and there's also a bit of stigma that is not gone.
Yes.
So they may process all of these things and say, why should I tell anybody? Of course, they are looking at even their MPs who have tested positive. They are going to Parliament. The Speaker is shouting hoarse, and they can't be bothered.
And as I said, you see, Samson, advice or leaving things to people, for people to decide for themselves, leaves a lot to be desired. I mean, that's why we pass laws, to ensure that the populace does its things in a particular way. We have to be clear on what the penalties are for disobeying an order to isolate or an advice to isolate. It has to be done. Yes, I know there's a stigma, but I think that by and by, as more people are getting COVID, the stigma is coming down. And you should remember, it's not just about you losing your job. It's about you killing somebody. And if we keep on hammering on it, it's quite unfortunate the MPs didn't set a good example, unfortunately. But I believe that if everybody who gets COVID comes out, I have COVID, I am self-isolating. I mean, they could have used that as a very good public education campaign. Unfortunately, they didn't take advantage of it and were rather going to work and infecting other people, unfortunately.
It still brings me back to the same legislation that the two of you have referred to, the Public Health Act 2012. Section 11 says, a medical officer may order a person living in the same house or compound, or a person who has come into contact with another person suffering or suspected to be suffering from a communicable disease, whether in an infected area or not, to be isolated in a designated place provided by the government until that person is considered safe to be discharged. A person authorized by the medical officer to carry out an order under subsection 1 may use reasonable force to compel that person to obey the order. If you don't obey all of these things, then you get into the crime and the penalty is given. So if I tested positive and because there's no place to contain me, I am told by the medical officer that I must self-isolate, and I don't. What have I breached?
As we keep on saying, we should look to the spirits and not just the wording of the law. Now, if there's no designated place for you to isolate, you've still been given an order to isolate. Now, what I have realized with a lot of people in these times is they do not have a medical officer telling them, go and isolate. You take a test at a private clinic, you're told of your results, and nobody even knows whether you're positive or negative, or that you're even taking the test, to even advise the necessary health professionals as to how to treat you.
No, but as we have come to understand, once you test positive, they tell you that you ought to go self-isolate and take A, B, C, D until it gets to a certain point, then you'll be moved into a health facility.
Yes. But Samson, it is a private facility. Somebody from a public medical facility, because you know who a medical officer is mandated by law. must be able to tell me, go into isolation. My records must be taken, and who is checking that I am actually obeying the order? Now, it's easy to say, but difficult to implement. Now, if there are serious, that's where sometimes I believe the police service would come in. Now, if information about people who have tested positive are made known, not necessarily to the public, but maybe the health facility within a particular area or the environmental unit of a particular assembly, then they can ensure that this person is positive. How are we ensuring that he's going to self-isolate? At home, if you are not getting a center for the person.
Okay.
But I'm giving my test, I'm told, go home. And the necessary next steps are not taken. So it becomes a bit difficult for everyone to, well, nobody is watching. Why don't I do what I'm supposed to do? And
before I hear any further from Aris, let's pick a call. You don't want to identify yourself for some good reason, you have told my producers. Please go ahead and let's hear you.
Yeah, my point is that assuming that I have the virus and in a working environment,
please go ahead.
And I'm working in an environment, and I've been asked to self-isolate. And I have some other brothers or sisters in the same environment. And contact tracing should be done. But here is the situation: those who are contact traced are still in the same working environment. Would that not put the rest of the workers at risk?
Right. Let me take Samuel's call, and then I'll let the lawyers attempt an answers to your question. Hello, Samuel.
Hello, Samson.
Yes, let's hear you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, I want to give you a suggestion that for the government to encourage the shift running, tax should be waived for all people so that they can reduce their staff, so that the production that they are doing, they could be able to cater to pay the workers. That is my suggestion.
Thank you.
The question that I would like to put is, now imagine somebody contracted COVID and the employee can see that he's not adhering to the protocols, being reckless. If such a party can be identified, would it be correct that maybe the employer can cause him to stay home, at least pay him only half of his salary, so that we can all be cautious about whatever we're supposed to do to protect ourselves and others?
Okay, thank you, Samuel. Susan has noted your question, and the anonymous caller, because of your workplace and what you are telling us, obviously a situation you are encountering, Aris has noted your question about contact tracing. Let's take a next call from Dr. Akum. Hello, Doc. Hello, Doc. Okay, Dr. Akum, you can call us back. It's important to hear from you. So let's begin. Aris, what would you say to our first caller?
So, I wasn't very clear on his question, but basically, from what I understand, he's talking about how being at home, he may be infecting his family members who would also go to their offices and possibly infect others.
His emphasis, I understand, is somebody has been tested, is identified, then yes, the other colleagues at work clearly yes, are supposed to be contact traced, and then they yes, too, something must happen, but that is not happening. What should happen? Right.
The EI makes provision for this under Section 5. It says that you are supposed to contact trace. So what they may do is to inform the health directorate, mm-hmm, the health directorate responsible for the area within which the business is located. Inform the person that indeed there's one person who has tested positive, and the employer, or we need the employer to test all the others. Now, you've seen that they've recently passed or they've recently done away with the medical fees for testing once a medical officer approves of same.
Yeah.
So I think that first will be to speak to the medical directorate or the labor office responsible for the area within which that that employment is found.
And the provision of the law you were referring to, Section 5, says a person who has been tested positive for COVID-19 shall provide all relevant information to the health authorities to enable contact tracing of persons who have come into contact with that person. A person who is identified through contact tracing to have come into contact with an infected person shall be tested for COVID-19, and where the results of the test is positive, that person shall be taken to a designated medical isolation center for treatment.
Yes. So precisely that. Once you have tested, you have to inform medical directorate. In this case, considering that it has happened in an office or a workplace, speak to your labor office. They have the protocols in place. They know who to speak to. They speak to the medical directorate, and then contact tracing is actually done to ensure that all the other members in that employment space would be tested to ensure that everybody is safe.
Right. Would you advise, having listened to the doctors, including Dr. Kumar Boaje of the Ghana Health Service, that once you are within the same environment and there's proximity by the way you work, and one person among the group has tested positive, the rest should actually begin to self-isolate even before contact tracing and testing?
Well, once again, it actually depends. It depends on what the work environment is like. If you are in a work environment where, for example, you actually share an office with the person, or you share a workspace with the person who has tested positive, yes, it may be advisable to start your self-isolation and then you test. If you are negative, you just come back to work. If you are positive, you continue with your isolation.
Thank you.
However, if you are in a different workspace, it may be a little problematic. Because what will happen is that once one person in a workplace of 100 people tests positive, that means that everybody will have to go home.
I understand that.
I don't think that is what was envisaged.
That's right. Yes, Susan, what would you say?
Well, I believe Iris has said
Okay.
the best of it.
Right. Samuel.
Yes, so to his question, there are internal disciplinary measures that every organization can undertake. Now, we all know the COVID protocols. Now, if one employee insists on disobeying these protocols, he can be subject to internal disciplinary measures, and the punishment, so to speak, might be the halving of his salary.
Okay.
But it shouldn't be done just because the employer thinks so. The necessary procedures should be undertaken. You must call a hearing and have him speak at that hearing. He must say something in his defense. And if he's found guilty of that misconduct, then he can be punished. Employees should not just go up and start punishing or saying that, I saw you do this, half salary. No, the correct procedure must be followed. And it wouldn't be wrong in those circumstances.
Okay.
Yes.
Hello, Emmanuel.
Hello?
Yes, let's hear you.
Yeah, I'm William.
All right.
One thing I want to say is that we are people who test positive to self-isolate themselves. And let's assume I'm staying in a single room with my family. And I went to the hospital. Are they expecting us to go back to the same house and isolate ourselves, or go and rent another apartment the government should put down some measures that once you test positive, they should interrogate you. I'm staying in a single room. When I go to the house, I'm going to stay with my family in the same apartment. So if there's a way they can self-isolate.
You're right, Volin. You're right. That's a genuine challenge. Thank you for bringing that. Let's go to Emmanuel. Hello, Emmanuel. Let's hear you.
Hello.
Yes, Emmanuel. Go ahead.
I'm Emmanuel, speaking from the northern region.
Emmanuel, go ahead.
Yeah. Please, I just have a little problem with the way people, especially the wearing of masks in the northern region. It's not something they've been doing often. And even those who wear it don't wear it properly. And when you ask them, they will tell you they are even wearing the mask for the sake of the dust, not of COVID. And they are trying to associate the whole COVID thing to their cultural beliefs and things. And if care is not taken, it is going to bring a serious problem.
Okay, thank you, Emmanuel. Hello, Ike. You're calling from Sakumano. Let's hear you.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Yeah, I was going to find out, okay, Mark, assuming you are in the construction company, must the company provide nose masks for all the workers, or the workers must provide nose masks? So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's take a last one. Osmond?
Yeah, Ali.
Hi, go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. With my case, I'm working at a company, and a friend of mine was tested positive with the COVID, and let's say a week later or days later, the manager came and have a meeting with us and saying that one of us have tested for positive on COVID, and the company is taking care of her and it's costing a lot. So anyone who also get tested or should get the COVID should stay home. Like it was like should count it or herself out of the company, something like that. And I want to know if that's right.
All right, thank you. So we can start from that point. Hello, Iris, the very last caller's concern. Please unmute.
Yes, can you hear me?
Great, perfect.
Right. So the last caller was saying that somebody tested positive at the office, and then the manager says that if you test positive, what should you do? You should not come to the office.
So the work is employment is taking care of this person, and yes, it does appear it's a bit of a toll on their finance. So he's saying if you test positive, that's the end of you at the workplace. You are gone.
Well, it's you cannot do that. It's unfair termination. The Labour Act specifically provides for unfair termination. If the employer cannot show that the termination of the employment is unfair, then it is unfair termination. There are steps within by which you terminate somebody's employment.
Okay.
If the person is totally sick or incapacitated forever and is unable to perform his duties, that is a different thing. But where you have a disease which possibly averagely you take 2 weeks off, it is unfair for you to say that because you have contracted a disease within the time of a pandemic, a global pandemic, you will lose your job. It is unfair termination. And you may report to the Labour Office and ensure that you are either reinstated, compensated, etc.
All right, thank you. Yes.
So in relation to the gentleman who works for a construction company.
Right.
Apparel, safety apparel are the employer's responsibility to provide to the employee. Now, mask wearing has now become part of the safety apparel.
PPE.
So they must provide it. The same way they provide the helmets, the Wellington boots, the gloves, the overalls for them to do their work with. And I think masks are even cheaper when you look at the other protective equipment they give to construction workers. So I think that employers should just provide it and ensure that he has a safe workplace.
But it's interesting why an employer may even want to wait for anybody to make that suggestion, because it is in the collective interest of the institution for you to provide it. Getting, you know, packs of masks and the various, you know, protective gear for observing the protocols shouldn't be a difficult thing to do.
At all. Just like they're supposed to provide Veronica buckets, hand washing facilities, sanitizers.
It's the responsibility of the employer.
Provide the mask. Because once they come to the workplace, the workers are the employer's responsibility. It's part of having a safe workplace.
Okay.
They should do what they need to do.
I don't remember the first two. The first was a contribution. The second was about in the northern part of the country where it says that they simply, the wearing of the mask is not the best. What can you say about it? Aris, what would be your comment about that? Of course, across the country, it's not been the best, but people are now trying to, you know, improve.
I will go back to education, and more education. We need to let people understand that the fact that person A was asymptomatic doesn't mean that person B will also be asymptomatic. At first, we thought that it was the older folks who were dying. Now we have young men in their 30s and 40s who are dying, people who are losing organs, etc. So we need to educate more and let people understand that the mask wearing is for your protection and for the protection of the other person.
Right. In fact, at the Komfo Teaching Hospital, as many as 11 kids, children, were tested positive for COVID-19. So it's not about various for aged people or what. Is there something you heard that may have escaped me or anyone else that you want to respond to?
I think for now, everything has been addressed.
Right.
But we still need to understand that COVID is here and COVID is real.
Right.
And we need to adhere to the dictates of COVID. So we have become slaves to COVID. And let's pray that the slavery will not last long and that we'll be able to wrest our freedom from it so that we can live our normal lives. But for now, let's try our best. It's difficult, I understand, but let's try our best to do what we need to do.
If the president were to initiate another EI specific to take care of this particular situation because the government didn't anticipate that we'll get to a time where it couldn't have facilities to contain, take people into isolation mandatorily, and then quarantine them and provide them treatment, what will be your suggestion? How should the state proceed in fashioning out a legislation that will be the springboard, the basis on which we educate, and for those who, you know, are recalcitrant, they will be punished? Let's start with Iris. That will be a final, you know, commentary.
What I would say is that even once again, as you've said, nobody anticipated that at a point in time you will have 8,000 people. So indeed, once we are fashioning out an EI, it should state clearly that if you have tested positive for this communicable disease, you are to stay in your place of abode. Stay in your place of abode where you sleep at night. Stay there. Unless you can show, for example, that there was a caller who came in and said that if he lives in a single room with 5 other persons,
that's right.
Unless you can show that, then the government would possibly have to look at ways of providing some makeshift facility where you will be isolated at the government provided place. But for the average person, where you probably share a room with one person and so the person can move out, you just stay in your place of abode. And then there will be a penalty similar to what is there for the mask wearing. Possibly the same 1,000 penalty units. I know that is a hot debate, but yes, if you go out and you intentionally infect other people, you shouldn't be allowed to go scot-free. Okay.
Yes, what will be your prescription, Susan?
Yes, I know there has been an EI passed where the government has mandated telecom companies to provide certain information.
Right.
I think that in relation to
that's for the purposes of contact tracing.
Yes.
Right.
I believe that such information can also be used for the purposes of ensuring that people who are isolating actually are isolating, so that you can trace where they are going. Their phone signal must be static to a particular mast. Then you know that they are not moving. I think all these things are things that should be in the EI. And of course, the type of isolation shouldn't be simply everybody move to an isolation center or self-isolate. But the medical officers must be given that leeway to determine who needs to go to an isolation center and who can afford to maybe stay on their own.
The example that the gentleman just gave a while ago. Okay.
Because then he's staying at home and he's liable to infect his wife and children.
Right.
So somebody like that needs to be in an isolation center. While somebody with a 5-bedroom house can stay at home and save the government the extra resources it would have needed.
Supposing I'm in a 5-bedroom house and I'm alone and I'm supposed to stay in, how do I take care of myself then?
Well, then arrangements can also be made for food delivery. I mean, there are always ways around it.
Right.
But what I always propose is a legislation shouldn't be too structured. I mean, a bit flexible that all the other things that can work can fit into the legislation. And that solves the problem most of the time.
Thank you so very much. Ari, is there anything you want to say again?
No, once again, as Susan has said, nobody anticipated that we would be where we are now. And we do not know whether by December we will have the same numbers or even worse. And so there must be some amount of common sense that will be used to govern. And we should be looking at the spirit of the legislations that have been passed to protect us all.
Ladies, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so very much. Iris Agri-Orleans, Managing Associate, Bayo & Co. Susanna Asabia Yangpong is Associate, T-Forcing & Co. Thank you so very much. This has been The Law. It's your legal light and health law. I'm Samson Ladia Yanini. God willing, next week we come your way with another edition. Until then, please stay safe. If you have tested positive, think about yourself and the next person. Have a good afternoon.